The Passenger by Isaac Petrov. Chapter 1 Boarding Call. The fluorescent lights of LAX Terminal 7 hummed with the familiar drone of perpetual motion, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even the most seasoned travelers feel slightly displaced from reality. Dr. Elias Warren adjusted his carry-on bag for the third time in as many minutes, his fingers unconsciously drumming against the worn leather handle, a nervous habit that had followed him from graduate school through tenure track and beyond. At 38, he still felt like he was playing dress-up in his professor's clothes, especially here among the confident business travelers and frequent flyers who moved through the terminal with the fluid certainty of people who belonged in places like this. Gate 47B stretched before him like a narrow corridor lined with identical blue chairs, most already occupied by passengers bound for Tokyo. The departure board glowed with reassuring certainty. Flight 447 on time, boarding Group A. Dr. Warren? The gate agent's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts with professional efficiency. We're ready to begin boarding first class.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I was... He fumbled for his boarding pass, nearly dropping his phone in the process. Still getting used to this whole first class thing. The agent smiled with practiced patience.
Conference in Tokyo.
Quantum Mechanics Symposium. Though honestly, I'm not sure why they invited me. Half these people probably think my research is complete theoretical nonsense.
It wasn't false modesty. Not entirely. Elias had spent the better part of 5 years developing mathematical frameworks for what he called temporal containment fields, equations that described how exotic matter might theoretically be held stable in high-energy states. Beautiful mathematics with no practical application, his department head had noted during his last review. Pure theory in search of a problem to solve. The Boeing 777 stretched before him like a metallic whale, its windows reflecting the orange glow of the California sunset. As he settled into seat 3A, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was an imposter in this leather cocoon, surrounded by executives who belonged in this rarefied air of international business travel. Stop it, he told himself, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant with a grateful nod. You earned this. Your paper on quantum field stabilization got you here. The cabin filled gradually with the usual pre-flight symphony, rolling luggage, muffled conversations in 3 languages, the mechanical whir of air conditioning systems preparing for the long journey ahead. Outside his window, ground crews moved with choreographed precision, their orange vests bright against the darkening tarmac. His seatmate arrived just as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of expensive watch that suggested either serious success or serious debt. She nodded politely before immediately burying herself in what looked like a technical manual written entirely in Japanese. Elias tried to focus on the safety video, but his mind kept drifting to the equations scribbled in his notebook, tucked safely in the seat pocket before him. 3 pages of mathematical poetry that described something that shouldn't exist, a theoretical framework for containing antimatter in stable configurations using manipulated space-time geometry. It was the kind of work that either won Nobel Prizes or got you quietly shuffled into early retirement.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our pushback from the gate. Flight time to Tokyo Narita will be approximately 11 hours and 45 minutes. The familiar pressure of acceleration pressed him back into his seat as the massive aircraft began its taxi toward the runway. Through his window, the lights of Los Angeles spread out like a circuit board, each point of illumination representing lives and dreams and futures stretching into the darkness.
11 hours and 45 minutes. Such a precise measurement of time, as if the universe operated on airline schedules. But time wasn't that simple, was it? Einstein had shown that much. Time was relative, flexible, subject to the whims of gravity and velocity. In his equations, time became something you could theoretically manipulate, stretch, compress. The engines reached full power with a roar that vibrated through the cabin walls, and Flight 447 lifted off into the Pacific night. Below them, the sprawling metropolis fell away until it became just another constellation in the darkness, and ahead lay 11 hours of suspended existence between one world and another. Elias closed his eyes and tried to ignore the persistent feeling that something fundamental was about to change, though he attributed it to nothing more than pre-conference nerves and too much caffeine. After all, what could possibly happen at 37,000 feet that would alter the careful, predictable trajectory of his academic life? The Boeing 777 climbed steadily into the star-filled void above the Pacific, carrying its 312 passengers toward a destination that, for at least one of them, would prove to be somewhere entirely different than Tokyo. In the gentle hum of pressurized air and muted conversations, Dr. Elias Warren settled in for what he believed would be the longest flight of his life, never suspecting it would also be the last flight of his timeline. Chapter 2, Altitude 37,000. 2 hours into the flight, Dr. Elias Warren had settled into the peculiar rhythm of long-haul travel. The cabin lights had dimmed to their nighttime amber glow, and most passengers had begun the familiar dance of trying to find comfortable sleeping positions in seats designed by someone who clearly had never needed to sleep in one. His seatmate, who had introduced herself simply as Keiko during the meal service, was still absorbed in her technical manual, occasionally making notes in margins with a precision that reminded Elias of his own academic habits. The document appeared to be some kind of engineering specification, filled with diagrams that looked vaguely familiar, yet somehow more advanced than anything he'd seen in current aerospace literature.
Forgive me for asking, but is that related to propulsion systems? In a manner of speaking, containment field dynamics, actually. Theoretical work for a project that's still in development. She glanced at him with sharp, intelligent eyes. You're a physicist, aren't you? I can tell by the way you're looking at these equations.
Is it that obvious? Elias had always thought he blended in better among civilians, but apparently his fascination with mathematical structures was written across his face like a neon sign.
Guilty as charged. Dr. Elias Warren, UCLA. I work mostly in theoretical frameworks, nothing as practical as what you're reading. Theoretical work has a way of becoming practical when you least expect it, Dr. Warren. Before he could ask what she meant by that cryptic comment, the aircraft hit turbulence.
It wasn't the gentle bumping that passengers on Pacific routes had learned to expect. This was something different. A series of sharp jolts that sent loose items sliding across tray tables and caused the overhead compartments to rattle with an almost musical rhythm. The seatbelt sign chimed on, and several flight attendants moved quickly but calmly through the aisles, checking that passengers were secure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected atmospheric conditions. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while the captain navigates through this weather system. But Elias was looking out his window, and what he saw didn't match the flight attendant's explanation. The night sky was clear, no storm clouds, no visible weather disturbance, just stars scattered across the darkness like mathematical points on a coordinate system. Yet the turbulence was intensifying, and now it had a strange quality to it, almost rhythmic, as if the aircraft was being gently shaken by some invisible hand. It's beginning. What's beginning? But she didn't answer. Instead, she was staring at her manual with an expression that looked almost like anticipation. The equations on the page seemed to be shifting in the dim light, or perhaps it was just the turbulence affecting his vision. He blinked hard, trying to focus.
Something's wrong. This isn't normal turbulence. And why does Keiko look like she was expecting this? The shaking intensified, and now other passengers were beginning to murmur with concern. A child started crying somewhere behind them. The flight attendants had strapped themselves into their jump seats, their professional composure intact, but their eyes betraying a worry that went beyond routine weather delays. Then, without warning, the turbulence stopped. Not gradually, as weather-related disturbances typically do, but instantly, as if someone had simply turned off a switch. The sudden stillness was more unsettling than the shaking had been. In the abrupt quiet, Elias could hear his own heartbeat and the barely audible hum of the aircraft systems.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We've encountered some unusual atmospheric conditions that our instruments are having difficulty reading. We're in contact with air traffic control and may need to adjust our flight path. Please remain seated while we assess the situation.
Unusual atmospheric conditions that instruments can't read? That's not how meteorology works. Weather systems have signatures, pressure differentials, electromagnetic patterns. If the instruments can't read it. Elias pulled out his phone, intending to check if the aircraft's Wi-Fi had any weather data available, but the screen showed something impossible. No signal, no GPS lock, and the time display was flickering between numbers that made no sense. 3:47 a.m. became 11:23 p.m., became 6:15 a.m., became symbols he didn't recognize.
Dr. Warren, I want you to know that what happens next isn't personal. You're being saved, not taken. What are you talking about? Saved from what?
The cabin lights began to flicker, but not in the chaotic way of electrical malfunction. They pulsed in sequence, as if following some predetermined pattern. Other passengers were starting to notice now, pointing at the windows where the darkness outside seemed to be shifting, taking on qualities that darkness shouldn't have. The woman beside him closed her manual and looked at him with eyes that held depths of knowledge he couldn't fathom.
From Flight 447, Dr. Warren. From what it was always meant to become.
This isn't happening. This can't be happening. I'm a physicist. I understand how the world works, and none of this makes sense. But even as his rational mind rejected what his senses were telling him, Elias felt something fundamental shifting around him. The air itself seemed to be changing texture, becoming thicker, more responsive to his presence. The familiar weight of his body in the airplane seat was becoming negotiable. The last thing Dr. Elias Warren remembered of his normal life was the gentle pressure of Keiko's hand on his arm and her voice, impossibly clear despite the growing chaos around them.
Close your eyes, Doctor. When you open them, everything will be different, but you'll finally be where you need to be.
And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, between the familiar and the impossible, Dr. Elias Warren discovered that some journeys don't end where the boarding pass says they will. Chapter 3, White Room Wake. The first sensation wasn't sight or sound, but the absence of motion. After hours of subtle aircraft vibration, the complete stillness felt wrong, like waking up to discover gravity had been turned off. Elias's eyes opened to brilliant white light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, casting no shadows. This isn't the plane. This isn't anywhere I've ever been. He was lying on something that felt like a bed but responded to his body like liquid mercury, supporting him perfectly while remaining firm. The surface beneath him hummed with an almost imperceptible energy, warm but not heated, alive in a way that defied explanation.
What the hell? The room around him was impossibly clean. Not hospital clean, but clean in a way that suggested the very concept of contamination had been engineered out of existence. The walls curved seamlessly into the ceiling, their surface a pearl white material that seemed to shift subtly in response to his gaze. No visible light sources, yet everything was illuminated with perfect, shadowless clarity.
As his vision cleared, details began to register. His clothes were gone, replaced by a garment that felt like silk but looked like liquid starlight, a one-piece outfit that seemed to adjust its fit as he moved. On his wrist, where his watch should have been, a thin band of the same pearl material displayed symbols that shifted and flowed like living text. The material properties alone are impossible. This level of adaptive technology, we're decades away from anything like this, maybe centuries. A section of the wall simply wasn't there anymore. No sliding, no mechanical movement. It had been solid, and now it was an opening. Through it stepped a figure that made Elias's breath catch. The woman was tall, with skin that held the subtle luminescence of someone who had spent time under alien suns. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a style that was both practical and elegant, and her eyes were the deep blue-green of Earth's oceans seen from orbit. She wore a uniform that seemed to be cut from the same material as his garment, but in deep blue, with silver accents that formed patterns he almost recognized.
Dr. Warren, I'm Captain Naira Vale. How are you feeling? Where am I? What happened to the plane, the other passengers? You're safe. That's the most important thing right now. You're aboard the USS Enterprise Lambda, and you're approximately 537 years from when you last remember being conscious.
500 years? This woman is either insane or... No, there's no or. This is a hallucination, a dream, some kind of breakdown.
That's impossible. I was on flight 447 to Tokyo. I was sitting next to a woman named Keiko who was reading some kind of manual. And then the memory hit him like a physical blow, the turbulence that stopped instantly, the lights pulsing in sequence, Keiko's impossible knowledge of what was about to happen. Keiko Tanaka, Lieutenant Commander, Temporal Operations Division. She was there to ensure your extraction proceeded smoothly and to minimize psychological trauma.
The room seemed to shift around Elias as the implications of her words sank in. Not shift physically, the walls remained the same, impossible white, but shift in meaning, in context, in the fundamental nature of reality itself.
Extraction from what? From Flight 447, Dr. Warren, which in your timeline was destroyed by what appeared to be a catastrophic engine failure approximately 4 minutes after your departure.
The silence that followed was filled with the subtle sounds of the ship around them, the whisper of air circulation that carried scents he couldn't identify, the barely audible hum of systems that operated on principles he didn't understand, the distant sense of vast spaces and purposeful activity. Everyone on that plane, Sarah in 14C with her wedding ring, the businessman who couldn't stop checking his phone, the flight attendant who smiled when she brought me coffee, all of them.
They're all dead. In the timeline you came from, yes, but Dr. Warren, that timeline was already compromised. Flight 447 was always going to be destroyed. We didn't cause that tragedy. We prevented a much larger one. She moved to what looked like a blank section of wall, and at her approach, it became transparent, revealing a view that stole what remained of Elias's breath. Stars, not the familiar constellations visible from Earth, but a vast field of stellar objects in colors and configurations that spoke of distances his mind couldn't process. And among them, structures that were clearly artificial, geometric forms that caught and reflected starlight, vessels that moved with purpose through the cosmic void. This is the 26th century, Dr. Warren. Humanity has spread to over 400 worlds. We've made contact with 17 distinct sentient species. We've learned to manipulate space and time in ways that would seem like magic to your era.
Elias stared at the impossible view, his physicist's mind trying to catalog and categorize what he was seeing, while his human consciousness simply reeled at the implications. The scale was too vast, the technology too advanced, the situation too far beyond anything he had prepared for.
Why? Why me? I'm nobody special. I'm just a researcher who hasn't published anything significant in 3 years. Because in 18 months, or rather, what would have been 18 months in your timeline, you were going to have a breakthrough, a mathematical framework that describes the quantum mechanics of warp core containment. Without that work, none of this exists. She gestured to the stars, to the ship around them, to the impossible vista of humanity's future. Every starship that has ever carried humans to the stars, every colony world that has been settled, every alliance we've forged with alien species, all of it depends on equations that were supposed to be written by a man who died in the crash of Flight 447.
A soft tone filled the room, and symbols appeared in the air between them, three-dimensional text that rotated slowly, beautiful and incomprehensible.
We need to begin the briefing process, Dr. Warren. There are complications. Temporal mechanics aren't as clean as we'd like them to be, and your presence here has already begun to create ripple effects.
Temporal mechanics, ripple effects. If this is real, and the evidence is becoming impossible to deny, then I'm looking at applied physics that's centuries ahead of anything we've theorized.
What kind of complications? The kind that could erase both your timeline and ours if we don't. Chapter 4, the briefing.
The wall behind Captain Vale dissolved entirely, revealing a corridor that stretched beyond Elias's vision. Curved walls lined with panels of soft light that pulsed in rhythm with something he couldn't identify. Other figures moved in the distance, their uniforms similar to Vale's but in different colors, their movements purposeful and unhurried.
Commander Sol, Lieutenant Dono, please join us.
2 figures approached from the corridor. The first was tall, lean, with the distinctive pointed ears and angular features that Elias recognized from decades of science fiction. Except, this wasn't fiction. This was a Vulcan, walking toward him with measured steps, carrying a device that projected holographic data streams around his hands like living jewelry.
Captain, the temporal displacement has been successful. but we're detecting quantum resonance patterns that suggest timeline fragmentation. The extraction may have created a paradox cascade.
The second figure was human, or mostly human. Lieutenant Donnell moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost too perfect, her eyes reflecting light in a way that suggested technological enhancement. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies just at the edge of Elias's hearing.
Dr. Warren, your neural patterns are fascinating. There's a quantum signature in your brainwave activity that we've never observed in temporal extractions before. It's as if your consciousness exists partially outside normal space-time. I'm sorry, but this is insane. Yesterday I was worried about conference presentations and grant applications, and now you're telling me that my brain has quantum signatures and that I'm somehow responsible for the entire future of humanity? Doctor, I understand this is overwhelming, but we need you to focus. Every minute we delay increases the probability of timeline collapse.
She gestured, and the air around them filled with three-dimensional charts and equations that rotated slowly, their surfaces covered with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Some of the mathematics was familiar: relativity, quantum mechanics, field theory, but interwoven with concepts that seemed to bend the very idea of what mathematics could describe.
Captain, Admiral Rowe is requesting an immediate status report. The Temporal Integrity Commission is monitoring our mission parameters with increasing scrutiny.
Tell the Admiral that we're proceeding according to protocol. Dr. Warren's integration is progressing within acceptable parameters.
There was something in her tone, a tension that suggested this mission wasn't as straightforward as she'd initially implied. Elias caught the exchange between Saul and Vale, a look that spoke of complications beyond what they'd told him.
What aren't you telling me? What's the Temporal Integrity Commission? And why do I get the feeling that not everyone agrees with this rescue mission? Dr. Warren, temporal extraction is controversial. The Commission maintains that any interference with past events, even to prevent larger catastrophes, creates unpredictable risks to the timeline's stability.
She manipulated the holographic display, and suddenly Elias was looking at a representation of time itself, branching paths that split and converged, some lines glowing steady and bright, others flickering or fading to darkness.
This is your original timeline, the one where Flight 447 crashed and you died. Notice how it continues but grows increasingly unstable? Without your equations, humanity's expansion into space becomes chaotic. Wars break out over resources. First contact with alien species goes badly. Entire colony worlds are abandoned.
The display shifted, showing another branch, brighter, more stable, with connections spreading like a vast web across the galaxy.
This is the timeline where you survive and complete your work. But here's the problem. By extracting you, we've created a third possibility.
A new branch appeared in the display, this one flickering between existence and nothingness, its very instability causing ripples that affected both other timelines.
The paradox branch. In this timeline, your extraction prevents the crash, but also prevents the emotional trauma that was supposed to drive your breakthrough. Without that catalyst, you never developed the equations that justified our coming back to save you in the first place.
A closed loop. They came back to save me because of work I was supposed to do, but saving me might prevent me from doing that work, which means they wouldn't have come back to save me, which means...
It's a causality loop, a temporal paradox. If you save me, I might not create the work that made saving me necessary, which means you wouldn't have saved me, which means the timeline becomes unstable. Reality itself starts to unravel.
The holographic display showed the paradox branch growing larger, its instability spreading like an infection through the other timelines. Where it touched, the bright lines of possibility dimmed or disappeared entirely.
We have approximately 72 hours before the paradox cascade reaches critical mass. After that point, all three timelines collapse into quantum foam.
So what's the solution? Send me back, let the plane crash? That's one option. The Commission has suggested that returning you to your original timeline might be the safest course of action. But there might be another way. Dr. Warren, you said you've been struggling with your research for 3 years. What if the breakthrough wasn't supposed to come from trauma, but from exposure to advanced mathematics? What if seeing our equations could trigger the insights you were meant to have?
She gestured, and suddenly the air around Elias filled with mathematics that made his breath catch. Equations that described the fundamental structure of space-time, the relationship between matter and energy at scales both quantum and cosmic, formulations that his mind began to process and extend almost without conscious thought. Oh my God, I can see it. The pattern, the way quantum fields interact with gravitational distortion. It's not just mathematics, it's the architecture of reality itself.
Dr. Warren, are you seeing something? The containment field equations. They're not just about containing energy, they're about creating stable pockets of manipulated space-time. But there's something else, something about consciousness and quantum observation that changes everything.
As the equations flowed through his mind, Elias began to understand not just the mathematics of warp drive, but something far more profound, the role of consciousness itself in shaping reality at the quantum level.
Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Rowe. The Commission has issued a direct order.
Put the Admiral through, Commander.
The holographic display flickered, replacing the swirling mathematics with the stern visage of Admiral Rowe. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had made impossible decisions for decades.
Captain Vale, I trust you've briefed Dr. Warren on his situation. We have, Admiral. We were just exploring potential solutions to the paradox. There is only one solution, Captain. The Commission has reviewed the temporal matrices. Dr. Warren must be returned to his original timeline. Immediately. Wait, what? You mean sent back to die in the crash? Dr. Warren, your death serves a greater purpose. The trauma of losing you drives your colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, to complete your theoretical framework. She publishes your joint research posthumously, crediting you as co-author. That work becomes the foundation for warp containment theory.
Sarah. They're saying Sarah was supposed to finish our work after I died, that my death was the catalyst for everything.
Admiral, with respect, we've observed Dr. Warren demonstrating remarkable intuitive grasp of advanced temporal mathematics. Perhaps direct exposure to our equations could... Lieutenant, you will not interfere with Commission directives. Captain Vale, you have 6 hours to return Dr. Warren to the exact spatiotemporal coordinates of his extraction. That is a direct order.
The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable quiet. Elias felt the weight of 5 centuries of human achievement pressing down on him, entire civilizations that might never exist if he chose to live.
Dr. Warren, I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. The Commission has run millions of probability matrices that all end with me dead.
Dr. Warren, from a purely logical standpoint, the needs of trillions of future humans outweigh.
Outweigh what, Commander? My need to live, to see my daughter graduate college, to maybe, just maybe, figure out these equations myself without having to die for them?
The words hung in the air, and suddenly the abstract mathematics became personal. This wasn't just about temporal mechanics and causality loops. It was about a man who had boarded a plane thinking about conference presentations and tenure reviews, now being asked to sacrifice everything for a future he'd never see.
Captain, what if we're thinking about this wrong? The paradox assumes Dr. Warren needs to die for the breakthrough to occur. But what if the breakthrough was always supposed to come from him directly? The timeline shows Dr. Chen publishing the work posthumously, but what if that's not the original timeline? What if our extraction created the paradox by removing Dr. Warren before he could complete his own research?
That would require assuming our intervention changed the timeline we came from, a temporal impossibility according to current theory.
But what if they're wrong? What if there's something they don't understand about how consciousness affects quantum mechanics?
Commander, you said consciousness plays a role in quantum observation, right? What if time travel itself involves consciousness in ways your models don't account for? Captain, I'm reading quantum fluctuations in Dr. Warren's neural patterns, the same resonance frequencies we see in temporal field generators. That's impossible. Humans don't naturally resonate with temporal fields. Unless exposure to time travel changes something fundamental. What if being extracted from my timeline didn't just move me through space and time? What if it quantum entangled my consciousness with the temporal matrix itself?
The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If Elias had been fundamentally altered by his extraction, then the mathematics of the paradox changed entirely. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was part of the temporal equation.
Dr. Warren, what you're suggesting would mean that consciousness itself can become a temporal variable. That would revolutionize our understanding of
Red alert. Temporal cascade detected. All hands to stations. Port.
Captain, the paradox is accelerating. Something has destabilized the quantum matrix. We're seeing reality fractures across 17 different timeline branches.
It's not just our paradox anymore. The Commission's order to return Dr. Warren has created additional temporal stress. The timeline is trying to resolve multiple contradictory imperatives simultaneously. It's because they told me I have to die, isn't it? My consciousness is now aware of the paradox, and that awareness is affecting the quantum outcome. The observer effect. By making you conscious of your role in the timeline, we've made you a quantum observer of your own fate.
They came to save me, but saving me might destroy everything. And now that I know about it, my very awareness is making it worse. What kind of choice is that? As reality itself began to fracture around them, Elias realized that the mathematics weren't just theoretical anymore. The equations flowing through his mind weren't just describing possible futures. They were creating them.
Captain, what if the solution isn't sending me back or keeping me here? What if it's something else entirely, something that requires me to understand not just the mathematics of time travel, but the mathematics of consciousness itself? Dr. Warren, we have less than 70 hours before complete temporal collapse. If you have an idea, any idea, now is the time.
And in that moment, surrounded by impossible mathematics and the weight of countless futures, Elias began to see the outline of an equation that would change not just his fate, but the very nature of existence itself. Chapter 6: Echoes of Impact. The Enterprise temporal sensors screamed with data as reality bent around them like heated metal. Elias stood at the center of the storm, his consciousness somehow threading through quantum possibilities that shouldn't exist.
Sol, I need those timeline projections now.
Captain, the cascade is unlike anything in our records. We're not just seeing temporal fractures, we're seeing echo events, fragments of the original timeline bleeding through.
Dr. Warren, look at the main viewer.
The screen flickered, and suddenly they weren't looking at stars anymore. They were looking at Flight 447, 37,000 feet above the Pacific, moments before Elias had vanished.
That's me, in seat 23C.
On the screen, past Elias sat unconscious, his head against the window, unaware that in less than 3 minutes, turbulence would wake him to find an empty seat beside him, the seat where the businessman with the briefcase should have been.
The temporal extraction created a void. Someone else disappeared when we took you.
The quantum foam is filling that void with probability echoes. Every possible outcome of that missing passenger is cascading through the timeline simultaneously.
The view screen shimmered, showing dozens of overlapping images. Flight 447 landing safely in Tokyo, Flight 447 crashing into the ocean, Flight 447 never existing at all. In some versions, the missing passenger was a terrorist, in others, a diplomat. In still others, the seat had always been empty.
The paradox is creating recursive loops. Each echo event generates new possibilities, which generate more echoes. It's an exponential cascade. You're saying that by saving me, you didn't just change my timeline. You created a quantum uncertainty about who was supposed to be in that other seat. Dr. Warren, we need to know, do you remember anything about the passenger in 23B? Anything at all?
Think Elias, the businessman, the briefcase. He was nervous about something. What was in that case? Why does it feel important?
He was scared, not of flying, of something else. He kept checking his watch, looking at his briefcase like it contained something dangerous.
Computer, cross-reference all temporal anomalies with passenger manifest for United Flight 447, seat 23B.
Passenger identity classified. Temporal Security Commission override in effect.
The bridge fell quiet except for the hum of the warp core and the whisper of recycled air. Even the usually chattering consoles seemed to hold their breath.
The Commission classified a passenger manifest? Sol, that's not standard protocol. Captain, I'm detecting quantum resonance signatures in Dr. Warren's memory engrams, the same patterns we see in temporal shielding technology. What does that mean?
It means, Dr. Warren, that someone has been manipulating your memories, specifically your memories of that flight.
The implications crashed over them like a temporal wave. If Elias's memories had been altered, if the passenger in 23B was significant enough to classify, then the mission was far more complex than anyone had realized.
Donald, can you restore his original memories? I can try, but if they were shielded by temporal technology, removing the blocks could create additional paradoxes. Do it. Dr. Warren, if those memories were blocked, there might be a reason. The Temporal Commission doesn't use memory shielding lightly. Captain, you brought me here because my equations are supposedly crucial to humanity's future. But what if the real reason I'm important isn't what I'll discover? It's what I already know and forgot.
The businessman's briefcase, his nervousness, the way he kept looking at me during boarding. What if he wasn't a random passenger? What if he was there because of me?
Dr. Warren, temporal memory restoration is extremely dangerous. The psychological shock alone could...
Commander, with respect, I'm already living through the impossible. A little more impossibility won't kill me. Beginning memory restoration sequence. Dr. Warren, you may experience disorientation, temporal displacement sensations, and, well, we don't really know what else.
As the Enterprise's medical bay hummed with temporal energy, Elias felt something shift in his mind, like a door opening in a room he'd forgotten existed. The memories came flooding back with crystalline clarity. The businessman in 23B wasn't a businessman at all. He was Dr. Marcus Chen, a quantum physicist from CERN, and his briefcase contained preliminary data on temporal field equations, equations that Elias had helped develop in secret before the flight.
Oh my God, Chen, Marcus Chen from the Geneva Project. He was carrying our research. What research? Temporal field manipulation. We'd been working on theoretical frameworks for time travel, but we thought it was just math, just theoretical models.
Dr. Warren, are you saying that in your timeline, humans were already developing temporal technology?
The truth hit them all simultaneously. The mission hadn't been about saving a physicist whose future discoveries would enable time travel. It had been about preventing the discovery of time travel in the wrong timeline by the wrong people for the wrong reasons.
They didn't extract me to save my future work. They extracted me to stop my past work, and Chen, Marcus, was supposed to die on that flight. Chapter 7, The Roe Directive.
The Enterprise's bridge erupted in crimson warning lights as Admiral Roe's transmission pierced through subspace. Her holographic form materialized with the cold precision of a temporal guillotine, her expression carved from bureaucratic stone.
Captain Vale, you will cease all interaction with the extracted subject immediately. New directives are in effect as of Stardate 2387.4. Admiral, with respect, Dr. Warren's memories have revealed critical information about... Captain, the Temporal Integrity Commission has reviewed the Cascade data. Your mission parameters have fundamentally changed. Dr. Warren represents a Class Alpha temporal contamination risk. Contamination risk? What the hell does that mean?
They're talking about me like I'm a virus, like I'm something that needs to be contained or eliminated.
Dr. Warren, your restored memories confirm our worst fears. The Geneva project you were working on wasn't theoretical. It was actively developing functional temporal technology 3 centuries ahead of schedule.
Admiral, if humans in the 21st century achieved temporal manipulation,
the timeline corruption would be absolute. Every major historical event from 2024 forward would be compromised. The Federation, Starfleet, first contact with the Vulcans, none of it would exist as we know it.
The weight of the revelation settled over the bridge like a temporal shroud. Elias wasn't just a passenger who'd been saved from a doomed flight. He was patient zero in a timeline plague that could unravel centuries of human progress.
Admiral, I'm detecting massive temporal flux readings from Dr. Warren's quantum signature. His very presence aboard our ship is creating microfractures in local spacetime. Are you saying I'm destroying reality just by being here? Dr. Warren, your timeline was supposed to end on Flight 447. Your survival has created a paradox cascade that threatens the fundamental structure of causality itself. There has to be another way. We don't execute people for temporal accidents. This isn't an execution, Captain. It's a correction. Dr. Warren will be returned to his original timeline at the moment of extraction. The flight will proceed as destined.
The euphemism hung in the recycled air like a death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic silk. Return to timeline, the moment of extraction, the plane that was already burning, already falling, already dead.
You're going to put me back on a crashing plane. The needs of trillions across multiple timelines outweigh the life of one individual, Dr. Warren, even one as brilliant as yourself.
Elias stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the deck plating. Every eye on the bridge tracked his movement as he paced toward the view screen, his hands clenched into fists.
No, absolutely not. You people dragged me out of my life, showed me wonders I never imagined, told me I was important enough to save, and now you want to throw me back into a fireball because it's convenient?
Dr. Warren, I understand your anger, but the mathematical reality is inescapable. Your continued existence creates an exponential paradox multiplication.
Mathematics. You want to talk mathematics? I've spent my entire career studying the elegant equations that govern reality. But you know what I learned? Math doesn't care about human lives. People do.
They think they can reduce me to a variable in their precious equations. But I'm not just a number. I'm a person with choices, with agency, with the right to fight for my own existence.
Admiral, request permission to explore alternative solutions. Lieutenant Donnell has been analyzing temporal stabilization protocols. Permission denied. Captain, you have 6 hours to prepare Dr. Warren for temporal reintegration. The correction will proceed on schedule.
The hologram flickered and died, leaving the bridge in the cold glow of emergency lighting. The silence stretched like a taut cable, ready to snap under the weight of impossible choices.
Captain, there might be something the Admiral doesn't know. During the memory restoration, I detected quantum entanglement traces between Dr. Warren and the Geneva Project data. What kind of traces? The equations you and Dr. Chen developed, they're not just theoretical frameworks. They're quantum locked to your specific neural patterns. Without your living consciousness to maintain the quantum coherence, the research becomes mathematically unstable.
Are you suggesting that Dr. Warren's death wouldn't just preserve the timeline, it would actively corrupt the Geneva research?
Making it useless for temporal development.
The revelation crackled through the bridge like an electrical current. If Donnell was right, if Elias's survival was the key to preventing temporal technology rather than enabling it, then everything the Temporal Integrity Commission believed was wrong.
So either way, I'm the linchpin. Live or die, the timeline changes depend on me.
But if they're wrong about the consequences, if my death doesn't solve their paradox problem, then I'll have died for nothing. And if they're right, then my life is still worth more than their mathematical certainties.
Another alarm pierced the bridge atmosphere as Lieutenant Donnell's console erupted in cascading data streams. Her face paled as she processed the incoming information.
Captain, I'm detecting massive temporal distortions approaching our position. Something's coming through the time stream. Something big. On screen.
The view screen shimmered and resolved into an image that made everyone on the bridge draw breath simultaneously. Emerging from a swirling vortex of twisted space-time came another starship, sleek, predatory, and bearing the unmistakable insignia of the Temporal Integrity Commission's Enforcement Division.
The TIC retribution. Admiral Rowe isn't taking any chances.
It seems we're about to discover just how far the Commission will go to preserve their version of causality. Chapter 8. The Human Constant.
The TIC retribution hung in space like a predator studying its prey, its hull gleaming with temporal shielding that made reality shimmer around its edges. On the Enterprise L's bridge, the crew watched as the enforcement vessel's weapon systems powered up with deliberate menace.
Hail them. Channel open, Captain.
Admiral Rowe's image materialized on the view screen, but this wasn't the distant hologram from before. This was her physical presence aboard the Retribution, and her expression carried the weight of absolute certainty.
Captain Vale, you will stand down immediately and prepare to transfer Dr. Warren to our custody. Your hesitation to execute proper temporal protocols has forced the Commission's hand. So you brought a bigger ship to make sure the job gets done. How very Starfleet of you. Dr. Warren, your existence is a temporal anomaly that threatens the stability of causality itself. The Commission has voted unanimously. You will be returned to your proper place in the timeline.
Proper place, like I'm a misplaced library book that needs to be reshelved. They talk about temporal stability, but what about the stability of a human life? What about choice?
Admiral, new evidence suggests that Dr. Warren's survival may actually prevent the development of temporal technology rather than enable it. Lieutenant Donnell has discovered quantum entanglement between his consciousness and the Geneva research.
Theoretical speculation. The Commission deals in mathematical certainties, not wishful thinking. Then let us present our findings. Give us the chance to prove that your certainties might be wrong.
The Retribution's forward phaser arrays glowed with building energy, casting harsh shadows across the Enterprise bridge. The message was clear: compliance or destruction.
You have 5 minutes to transport Dr. Warren to our ship, Captain. After that, we will consider the Enterprise yield in violation of temporal law and act accordingly.
The transmission cut, leaving the bridge crew staring at the tactical display showing the Retribution's weapons lock.
Captain, I need more time to analyze the quantum patterns. If I can prove the entanglement theory... There's no time. They're not interested in proof, Mira. They've already decided I'm expendable. No one on my ship is expendable, Doctor. We don't abandon our people to appease bureaucrats, no matter what century they're from.
Elias looked around the bridge at the faces of people who had become more than his rescuers. They had become his crew, his family in this impossible situation. The weight of their loyalty pressed against his chest like a physical force.
Wait, Mira, you said my consciousness is quantum entangled with the Geneva research. What happens to that entanglement if I'm not just killed, but if I never existed at all? Theoretically, the quantum coherence would collapse retroactively. The research would become not just unstable, but impossible. The mathematical frameworks would never have been developed in the first place.
A temporal paradox of a different kind. If Dr. Warren never existed, then the research that led to his extraction couldn't exist either.
Creating a causality loop that would prevent the Commission from ever developing temporal technology.
They want to erase me to preserve their timeline? Fine. But maybe I can choose how I'm erased. Maybe I can make sure that if I go down, I take their precious temporal empire with me.
There's another option, one they haven't considered.
The bridge fell silent as Elias moved to Lieutenant Donnell's console, his fingers hovering over the quantum analysis displays.
The Commission assumes that removing me from the timeline will restore temporal stability. But what if we don't just remove me? What if we remove the possibility of me ever existing at all? A retroactive existence cascade. You're talking about quantum suicide on a temporal scale.
The philosophical implications alone.
Absolutely not. There has to be another way.
The proximity alarm screamed as the Retribution moved closer, its weapons now fully charged and targeting the Enterprise Lull's critical systems.
Naira, you saved me because you believed in the value of one life changing everything. Now I'm asking you to believe in the value of one life choosing to sacrifice itself to save everyone else. There has to be another way. We just need more time. Time's up, Captain. Transport Dr. Warren now, or we will take him by force.
Elias stepped toward the transporter controls, but his hand wasn't reaching for the activation sequence. Instead, he began inputting commands into the quantum analysis matrix, his physicist's mind calculating variables that even Lieutenant Donnell hadn't considered.
Tell me something, Naira. In your century, when children learn about the Warren equation, do they learn that sometimes the most human thing you can do is choose to become something more than human? Elias, don't...
The console under Elias's hands began to glow with building energy as he initiated a quantum cascade that would rewrite not just his existence, but the very possibility of his existence across all timelines. This is what it means to be human. Not just to survive, but to choose. Not just to exist, but to decide what that existence means. If I'm going to be erased, then I'll be the one holding the eraser.
He's creating a temporal constant, a fixed point that will preserve human choice across all possible timelines.
As the quantum field enveloped him, Elias Warren smiled at the crew who had given him the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that his life and his choice mattered.
The passenger chooses his own destination. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.